I'm going to make a little sketch, a little drawing, and I'm using regular printer paper and a ballpoint. You don't have to use special drawing paper or anything to practice. I made many drawings on this kind of paper, and this is after a painting by Jan Steen. Dutch 17th century artist. And first I'm going to draw the outlines of her face, starting with the eye. And as you can see, I'm sketching loosely. Well, loosely, I try to get the proportions right. But I don't use any thick lines or anything, just very, very light touch of lines I use. And I try to first draw the outlines. I have the habit of adding tonal values quite quickly, but I think it's more educational, more interesting to see for someone who's trying to learn this how the drawing is being built up first, to have a clear approach in these things. Although I think that it's interesting if you have the tendency to work in any other way, to explore that as well. So I have the tendency to start with tonal values, and I have the urge to make this eye dark already, but I don't do it. But I try to let you know how I make this drawing. I have this laser printed version of the face that I'm drawing, and sometimes when I try to get the proportions right, I make this movement. So I align this along with the drawing, and I make this movement, and I do this, and then I have more or less the place where the nose must be. So there's, let's say, when you look at this drawing, you have this line, I add these dots, and you have this line. So when you try to determine the direction of this from the eye, and you try to determine the direction of this from the other side of the eye, then you can see that I have drawn this too low. So I just correct this. And I know it's ballpoint and I cannot erase that, but I don't mind. I just go on, and you can do this as well. So you have this line here as well. So yeah, underneath this eye, the iris or the catchlight here, the highlight, you have the border of the nose, and this way you can make measurements. So I'm going to put this on the table here again, but now you can see how I do that. And I need to put her mouth on the paper as well. and with her mouth is the same. So it is to the right of the eye, and so a bit here on this, more or less this line, and then I look at this angle. So here you have the corner of her mouth, and it's constantly measuring to get that right. And I am doing this as a sort of demonstration. Sometimes you can see me make drawings in which I don't do that on the paper, but then it's a mental process in which those things more or less happen, I think. I'm not sure if when I'm fully concentrated, if there's something else going on that I can do that without really measuring. I have made some drawings in which I think it worked as well without measuring everything, but I think that's part experience as well, and being concentrated. So now I have a big chin. I think I need to correct that a bit. So now I have the outlines of her face on the paper, and I think it's a good thing now to add tonal values, and I start with the eye because that's most appealing to me now. I think that making the eyes lively, one has the tendency to work the eyes first, to work out the eyes first, that so you have the expression already from the beginning. And if the eyes have a certain expression from the start, then it is very encouraging to proceed with the drawing. And if the eyes are not convincing from the beginning, from the start, then it's difficult to stay motivated, because then you get the feeling that the drawing is not really working. I try to get the eyes lively from the start. And I think many painters, for example, have the tendency to put highlights in the eyes right from the beginning, perhaps earlier than they should do that when you look at the way that they create a painting, but it's very tempting to do that. And now I'm hatching, as you can see, so I'm trying to create some atmosphere right from the start by adding hatchings here. You have this light and dark effect in the painting itself. I mean, her face lights up to a dark background. Adding hatchings, and my way of adding hatchings is quite intuitively. I try to get a certain tonal value at a certain point in the drawing, so I just add hatchings of several directions on top of each other to make it work. And the eyes are a bit lighter than her skin, so I need to get her skin a bit darker than the white of the eyes. I think I need to correct the placement of this eye a bit. So and now I have the eyes and her nose a bit and a bit here worked out. Now I just want her mouth and her nose also done. So I have her facial features done. Because otherwise you get a very uneven drawing to work on. And I just add tonal values here and there. Actually, the whole face must be done. Underneath the eye. And you can think about to what extent you want to work out tonal values. Do you want really, the tonal values as they are, or can you approach it more or less minimalistic, so you only work out the eyes and the nose and leave the rest, let's say, as white as the paper? So I have the tendency now to draw all of the tonal values now. But if you want to make a quicker sketch, you can draw the eyes and the nose and the mouth, but you do not have to always draw the tonal values completely. It's just the question to what extent you want to work on a drawing. Because when you always draw all of the tonal values, it can become tedious as well to make a drawing. But I just go on now. And I want to make this area darker, the background against which you see the face lighter. Her neck here. And this is quite a dark area, so I want to give her face now the character that she has, so something is lacking now still. So I need to do this as well. I consider these kind of hatchings like veils, like tonal, as if you were applying a veil of hatchings to a drawing. Here I need to add a bit of the direction of her hair to give it more character. I think it needs that. And I'll just go on adding hatchings. And it's also important to not overdo it. But I need to do a lot of them still. I need to use a paper now to put my hand on, because otherwise my fingers would get some ink on them and I would spread that on places where I don't want ink on the paper. And now I have added hatchings all over the face. I'm not saying it's totally finished yet, but now I want to work on her features more, on her mouth and her nose and her eyes. So sometimes you work on the face as a whole, and that's necessary because everything has its place in the face as a whole, of course, but sometimes you also want to work on details further, and you go from one to another, back and forth, adding to the drawing as a whole and adding to details, hatchings and etc. And sometimes it's good to take a rest to reset your concentration a bit. Maybe that's the way of saying it. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I need to think about that expression, but anyway, sometimes you need to take a little break. Not saying that I'm going to do that now, but now I want to work on this shadow a bit more. And as you can see, I'm adding dots now, so to get some subtlety in the drawing, certain refinement, I sometimes add little dots instead of hatchings. And now I would like to make this whole area darker. So I'm just going to start with that. And I'm using regular printer paper, so I have to watch out to not overdo it, because otherwise the printer paper will get broken. When you're working on, let's say, 300 grams paper or something, you can do more in that respect, but you have to be careful now. I have to be careful now not to try to make it too dark. But as you can see, her face is now coming forward from the dark background a bit more. So you don't have to overdo it or add a lot of that. Here you can see an overview now, how I'm working. And it's good to practice a little bit with a ballpoint. I mean, you can get very subtle lines, you can get quite thick lines. You know, in here I use quite thick lines now, but you can also be very subtle here. So that's something that you can practice on. Working on her nose a bit. And I'm reaching a point that I think, well, I'm not going to do too much on this drawing. Her hair, that's very typical. Very characteristic. So I think it livens up the drawing to add suggestions of her hair here and here. Here I needed to make some adjustments. I think it's closer now a little bit to her character in the painting. I was struggling a little bit with the character of the drawing compared to the painting, but I think it's okay. It's not my most perfect drawing, but I like to be spontaneous as well sometimes. I think this is very characteristic, what happens at the corner of her mouth. I made this a little too dark, I think. So I make this even darker. And I'm reaching a point. This is very light now for me, so making a little bit darker. And sometimes you think you're close to finishing a drawing and all of a sudden you see all kinds of things. To be honest, I think that I made the space between her nose here and the eyes too much. This should have been a little bit higher even, and her mouth should have been a little bit higher. So I think I elongated her face a little too much. So, I'm being honest now. Just let so we can do this. I'm just drawing through all of the mistakes, just correcting them a little bit. Anyway, I'm correcting it. Why not? Yeah, this is a bit closer to her character. I made her face too long, as you can see. So that's what was bothering me all along while making this drawing. That I couldn't get her character right, but I didn't have the accurate positions, so I'm just placing her nose and her mouth a little bit higher, and I'm just drawing through the previous details, and it makes the drawing messier and in a weird way maybe more interesting as well. Nothing is perfect. Yeah, I get the feeling that character-wise it's getting closer to the Jan Steen now that I've made some adjustments. And this needs some adjustment too. Quite thick accentuations, as you can see here. And maybe that's one of the things I would like to say with this drawing. Don't be afraid to draw through a previous attempt. I mean, the mouth was too low and the nose was too low. Just draw through them. And I think that I leave it at this. I noticed that I made this a little too dark. I start to lose concentration a little bit, so I'm reaching a point that I can better stop now and I'd say, well, I think it's quite a charming drawing. For the composition, I want to make here some additions, but I think I leave it at this. Usually when I say I think I leave it at this, I always see something that I want to work on. Well, this is this is too harsh. Thank you very much for watching. Oh well.